Let's bring in Jill Colvin and Michael Graham. Jill is White House reporter for the Associated Press. She is in Washington. And Michael Graham is a CBSN political contributor and Boston Herald columnist. He is in Boston. Welcome to you both. Jill, let me begin with you. Senator Corker suggested that he was not just speaking for himself. Has he given cover to other Republicans who haven't spoken out?
Yeah, I mean, look, this is an extraordinary display from a sitting senator who was considered by President Donald Trump to be a member of his cabinet. These are two people who had spoken fairly regularly, who seemed to get along pretty well. The president doesn't have a lot of Republican allies in Congress. So it's really, truly extraordinary that he's coming out and saying this publicly. Now, look, we hear this kind of talk often, usually not on the record from lawmakers, although there are a couple. You know, we've got folks like Ben Sasse and Flake who have also come out and spoken against the president. But the concern now in the White House is that this, could open those floodgates to encourage more talk like this.
Yeah, I mean, Michael, what do you think? Because it was not that long ago before Donald Trump took office when we actually saw then Senator Corker going to Trump Tower and meeting with Donald Trump. I mean, what do you make of this?
Well, he was one of the Republicans who helped mainstream Donald Trump. He argued to his fellow establishment Republicans, look, the people are speaking. There's a message they want to give us, and it's our job to deal. If this is who our primary voters want, we need to, to accommodate. We need to make some changes and reach out. And now he's trashing him. And I will tell you, one of the advantages of doing a daily podcast for conservative listeners is I get to hear from them. And they have thrown Corker completely in this is why we hate the GOP. This is why we love it when McConnell is under attack. This is why we love it when Paul Ryan's under attack. This is the Trump that some Republicans, I think it's a number far too small to run a party. This is what they want, and it's a bizarre way to run a White House. And I will say the thing that hurts Corker the most, I think, with Republicans who might follow him is he waited until after he decided he's not going to run for re-election. I guarantee you, if his name were going to be on a ballot next year, he would not be talking that way to the New York Times.
Sure, right. All right. Well, Jill, your organization first reported on Senate Majority Leader Mitch McConnell's response when questioned about Corker. McConnell said, quote, Senator Corker is a valuable member of the Senate Republican caucus, and he's also on the Budget Committee and a particularly important player as we move to the floor on the budget next week, and he's an important part of our team. So what position, Jill, is Mitch McConnell in here?
I mean, he's in a very complicated position here. He needs to try to get all of his members on board. You've got, a Senate now that has basically failed to accomplish much of anything. They've got not only the budget, but this very ambitious tax reform plan that's sitting here that needs to be voted on. And Corker is somebody who's going to play an important role in that. So, I mean, the president at this point has really chosen, though you could argue that Corker is the one who really is picking this fight. But this is coming at a very, very complicated and kind of difficult time.
Yeah. Michael, let me ask you, I'm going to remind viewers that Senator Corker has already signaled opposition to the GOP tax framework before getting these attacks from the president. Do you expect this feud to change where Republican lawmakers stand on White House-backed legislation?
This Trump White House is already pushing past the traditional conservative models. I mean, they barely give lip service to the idea of deficit reduction, which was, unheard of before.
Right.
And so the assumption is that the deficit hawks are going to come around because the Republicans have to do something. And the easiest bill to pass is a bill that throws a lot of money around. And the assumption was that Bob Corker would, come up with this isn't what I would do, but it's the best we can do. Now you have to wonder if it's going to be the politics of personality. John McCain is loving undermining the Trump agenda after Trump talked about how he likes people who don't get captured in war. And it's clear that Susan Collins has a different agenda than helping the Republicans in the Senate. Now you add Bob Corker to that, and check my math. I think that takes us to below 50.
Yeah, I mean, what about that, Jill? So here you have a White House that is looking for some kind of legislative accomplishment, and yet there is a continual drip of fighting, essentially, not with the Democrats, but with Republicans. That's the thing that I think is still such a head scratcher for so many. We're talking about Republican senators.
Oh, yeah. I mean, he's president who is very often seems at war with his own party. You've got instances where, he's bringing Democratic leaders over for dinner, trying to come up with deals with them that the Republican leaders are just absolutely astounded by and have no idea that this kind of thing is happening. Then those deals apparently blow up. So there's just this level of unpredictability that's quite unprecedented. Yeah.
So Michael, let me ask you, against that backdrop of the president having reached out to some Democrats, the White House has been bringing attention to NFL protests for the past 3 weeks of the football season, most recently with Vice President Mike Pence's departure. What does the administration gain, you think, Michael, from drawing attention to that issue?
Well, it's a winner for them with their voters, absolutely. I mean, poll after poll after poll shows consistently 60-ish% of Americans or more really hate the idea of using the anthem as the vehicle for protest. That's separate from the issue about police policy and black citizens. So people already don't like it. I do think that there's a certain amount of unfair rap to Vice President Pence in the sense that if you were the governor of Indiana, you were going to be there when Peyton Manning's statue was unveiled and he was honored. I mean, I don't think there's any surprise that Vice President Pence would be at that game. I also, however, think the reports appear to be true that the White House is already anticipating that there might be a problem because, let's face it, it was the San Francisco 49ers, so they were thinking ahead. And, of course, there's also the theory going around that nobody wanted to sit and watch the crummy Colts and 49ers play anyway. And he was just looking for excuse to get out of what was going to be a pretty lousy game.
Yeah, Jill, let me ask you, though. I mean, does this focus on this culture war aspect of it take away any of the energy, any of the political capital that could be used to kind of push forward some sort of legislative accomplishment?
Sure, but I mean, this is something, look, at this point, the president's looking for issues, for topics that are going to rile up the base, and this is clearly something that speaks to them, also clearly something that speaks to him personally. I mean, I think the issue is here, look, there's a difference between a vice president sitting there in the stands watching something happen and deciding, you know, I don't want to take part in this, I'm going to leave. It's different if, you know, there was a plan beforehand. The president tweeted that he told Pence to leave if anybody was going to choose to kneel, and, you know, with this team, that's happened every single game. So the idea that this was kind of, you know, a premeditated act that was going to take place, you know, drew a lot of criticism for looking a little bit hollow.
Yeah. On another
topic.
Can
I add something to this real quick? Just this also is a good marker for Trump because, you know, his argument is that the East Coast elites just don't get the things that the typical American and flyover country cares about. And the more the East Coast elites write, this protest is fine, and who are these people I have a problem with, and what's wrong with you? The more they just feed the narrative that Trump is a guy who gets them and is on their side versus these other people who don't.
So it feeds right into the narrative that his base very much wants to see. All right, on another topic, Jill, you have a story out Monday night looking at reaction to the Trump administration's demands on the issue of immigration. What does that wish list mean for efforts to protect dreamers in the U.S.?
I mean, it means that any potential legislation to extend these DACA benefits is on very, very, very tenuous ground right now. The president had suggested last month that he would be open to some kind of deal in which these so-called dreamers would continue to be allowed to live and work in the country in exchange for some kind of border security package. But this list of demands, I mean, like, dozens and dozens of demands that the White House put out last night is just so far beyond what anybody had expected. They're things that the administration has said that they were interested in, but the idea of tying things like a crackdown on sanctuary cities, making it easier to deport minor children who come across the border, all of those things are just non-starters for Democrats. A lot of them are things that are quite divisive for Republicans. And if the president comes out there and says, we need you to pass all of these things, all dozen of these things, in order for me to sign legislation, it really seems like it's a no-go.
Michael, as I look at that list that we were just putting up there, I wonder how much of that was a direct result of the very harsh criticism that President Trump received after it was revealed he was potentially looking to work with Democrats on a so-called Dreamers deal. I mean, I remember looking at Twitter at that time, and it was amazing to see how conservatives were incensed at the notion that the president tried to reach out to Chuck Schumer and Nancy Pelosi on this.
Yeah, I mean, it's a two-way loss for him. One is the nationalist base really cares about border issues, and the other one is there were people who always were fearful that Trump would turn out to be a Democrat in Republican clothing. In fact, you can't even say he has Republican clothing, a Democrat in a Republican cravat, maybe, and that he would flip over to the other side. But I also wonder how much of this isn't classic art of the deal, that you load up the list, and if you end up with, and I've talked to so many people like the Center for Immigration Studies, which is a border security group, that if they come out of this with requiring E-Verify, not just voluntarily, but forcing every employer to use E-Verify, they can change the model for future migration away from chain migration, which really, in a way, doesn't make a lot of sense if you look at it from a policy standpoint. It's about compassion, not policy, and go to a more of a point system where if you have the skills we need, you get on the front of the list. And then some more fencing, some more token amount. They feel like if they can get that, they know the DACA kids aren't going to get deported anyway. They'll call that a win. So there's 3 out of the 70 items on this list.
Yeah.
Trump can compromise on 67 and walk away with a win.
Jill, it's interesting. Michael brings this up. Potentially the real focus here for some is legal immigration and fundamentally changing the way. I mean, this is a huge thing when we looked at that list. The notion of changing the legal immigration system so that it is no longer the chain migration system, as Michael points out, but more to this quote-unquote merit-based system. That is something that Democrats have not voiced any kind of appetite for in the least.
I mean, Republicans also haven't either. I mean, those ideas come from a piece of legislation called the RAISE Act that really hasn't gotten much traction at all in Congress. The only time we really found out about it was when the Trump administration came out and in a kind of very big announcement decided it was going to endorse this system. And what they're proposing is a very dramatic reimagining of the entire way that the United States distributes green cards. You'd get rid of the diversity lottery. You'd create a new points-based system that's more similar to what they have in countries like Canada. This is just a total reimagining that, look, the president has given Congress until March to come up with a plan for protecting these DACA recipients. The idea that a Congress that has been able to accomplish so little would be able to reform the entire, not even illegal immigration, but the legal immigration system between now and March just sounds very unrealistic. Yeah,
we're going to just wait and see what exactly comes out of any kind of final immigration deal. Meantime, EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt announced a repeal of President Obama's signature rule on carbon emissions from power plants. Jill, for a White House that struggled with legislative priorities, what role are regulatory rollbacks like this playing in the administration?
I mean, this has been their #1 win. If you look at the list of accomplishments that this White House is able to talk about, its ability to roll back the Obama era environmental regulations is arguably the most significant thing that they've done so far. Look at the gamut from pulling out of the Paris Agreement to some of the other regulations that come, in this package of regulating various kinds of power plants, clean water rules. This is really where they've been able to score their wins.
Yeah, and Michael, it seems to be something that certainly we've heard from President Trump himself when he's gone out and had his rallies tout these kinds of moves.
I also like the fact that he's using it to put pressure on Congress. This is the second time now. You mentioned DACA. He says, hey, you guys want to fix this? Go right ahead. It's your job. What did Pruitt say today? He didn't say you can't treat carbon dioxide like a pollutant. He said it's not the job of the EPA to make that decision on our own just through fiat. Congress can pass a carbon restricting law anytime they want, and they've talked about it many times, and they've never come close. And so it's a double win for Trump. He moves on an agenda he's talked about, which is ending picking winners and losers on the energy side, and he puts it back on his Republican friends and says, hey guys, this is on you now. Have a nice day.
All right, so much more to talk to as the week unfolds, I'm sure. Michael Graham and Jill Colvin, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.